talk to you about organic food. Organic food is basically a labeling process in which food is grown without most conventional pesticides, sewage-based fertilizers, genetic engineering, or radiation. That does not mean that conventional food uses all these methods, but that they're just not regulated as much. Many people are concerned that pesticides have health effects, and so they turn to organic because they think it's more healthy. My proposition is that conventional food is just as healthy as organic food. My supporting points are organic food still contains some pesticides, the consumption of pesticides poses no long-term health effects, and healthy options come from healthy eating. My first point is that organic food still contains some pesticides. In USDA's Code of Federal Regulations on Organic Farming, there is a list of allowed synthetic substances for the use of organic production and handling. These substances are those that cannot be produced naturally, but maintain nutritional quality of the food and are generally recognized as safe by the FDA. The FDA is like the Food and Drug Administration. There are over 20 approved chemicals, including disinfectants, sanitizers, alcohols, chlorine materials, hydrogen peroxide, herbicides, and some animal repellents and some insecticides. So yes, organic food does use pesticides. Also, some organic pesticides are used more intensively than synthetic pesticides because they're less effective. According to the National Center for Food and Agricultural Policy, the top two fungicides, copper and sulfur, were used at a rate of 4 and 34 pounds per acre in 1971. In contrast, the synthetic fungicides only required a rate of 1.6 pounds per acre, which is less than half the amount of organic alternatives. So not only do organic food use pesticides, but in some instances it's more concentratedly used. My second point is that there is no long-term effects of the consumption of pesticides. In a study testing the health effects of chronic pesticide exposure, published in the Annual Review of Public Health, the only disease associated with pesticide use would be among those who accidentally or intentionally misuse the product. That means that, yes, if you have a large amount of pesticides, it's probably not that good for you. But the amount that we consume on a daily basis is not, is so minimal that it has no effects on our health. Pesticides used in conventional farming are regulated to ensure food safety. The Food Quality Protection Act in 1996 gave the Environmental Protection Agency a mandate to review and strengthen safety limits for pesticide residues in food. This means that pesticides, both natural and synthetic, are not going to be used unless they're recognized as safe for consumption. So they're not going to put food out there if they know it's not safe for us. My final point is that healthy options come from healthy eating. Harvard Women's Health Watch claims that the benefits of eating fruits and vegetables outweigh any possible risk of ingesting traces of pesticides, and that any traces of pesticides can simply be washed or peeled off. This shows that it's not just about eating organic, but just having a balance of nutrients. So if you have like organic chocolate and organic like goldfish, it's not the same as just having the nutrients of fruits and vegetables. Also, many natural products are not labeled as organic because it's a very expensive process. Many locally grown produce does not contain pesticide waxes or preservatives that's used in shipping, and many conventional farmers use natural substances as well in their farming practices. So there are other options that are healthy and natural. In conclusion, conventional food is just as healthy an option as organic food. This is proved through my 3 points that organic food still contains pesticides, pesticides have no long-term effects, and healthy eating depends on the food choices you make.
All right, Melissa, the proposition's clearly identified. The contents are laid out adequately. I do think you might want to have a little bit of an explanation on how some of those points are connected to the proposition because there are some questions that come up, especially on the third point. The first point also suggests that the use of certain kinds of materials might be the equivalent of pesticides. I'm not exactly sure that you're treating them as equivocal terms. I'm not sure that they are equivalent, and I think that you need to explain that a little bit more. The signposting in the body of the speech was clear. I thought you did a good job on that. Evidence, there are a couple of examples that are used. They're not really given any source citation. There is a little bit of information about the EPA and the FDA regulations that are going on there. I think that that's helpful. That's good factual data that supports your point. But for instance, the claim that small amounts of pesticide are safe and are unlikely to produce any harm, there's only that general piece of evidence that you have at the beginning of that section that talks about how it's only likely to be harmful if there's misuse. But I don't know what level of harm is likely to occur from the kinds of exposures that are claimed people get from eating conventional foods that are not prepared or are grown organically. The whole first point where you're talking about the pesticides, it sounds to me like there's a difference between organic pesticides and synthetic pesticides, and that people who are organic, they're still using a pesticide, but there's something potentially problematic about those pesticides. If the comparison that you make is into the amounts of pesticide that are being used, which is not necessarily the same thing as toxicity or potential risk factors of the chemicals that are in those kinds of things. And I think that's where there needs to be a little bit more argument. On the last point, I think you need a little bit more proof. It suggests like there are a lot of conventional foods that are perfectly safe, that it's just onerous to get them through and have them labeled as organic, even though they basically are the same thing as organic. I didn't really hear much evidence on that particular point. I'm not saying that it's not a true point, but I am saying that it's not convincing at this particular part of the argument. You have time to add a few things like that, and so I think that would have buttressed the position that you're taking there. There's a good summary at the end, doing a little more reading than you want to do. All right, thank you.